Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everything Zen 1.5. I'm Mark Sells, along with Ralph Tedesco, and this is our Director's Cut, or bonus material from Episode 1 of our November 2020 podcast, the entire interview we had with writer-director Neil LaBute. So sit back and listen. We hope you'll enjoy it as much as we did. Where did your love for storytelling first begin? And piggybacking on that, what plays or films influenced you most growing up?
I guess, the real push towards storytelling came from, from being a writer came out of being a reader. I was someone who was sort of, saved maybe too great a word for it, but why not? That's, a word that I believe in. I think the public library system did me a huge service, and so I would say my mom's love of reading and subsequently her taking me to the library and me spending time there and checking out dozens and dozens of books, just kind of not began my love of storytelling, wherever that sort of first comes from hearing those original tales that, a lot of them come out of the Grimm's and Hans Christian Andersen, all kinds of sources, but definitely being able to devour as many books as I could get my hands on. I spent a lot of time in front of the television, no question. My mother, again, had a love of, my father as well, but it's a very certain kind of movie. Like, he liked war movies, he liked Westerns. So I got a certain amount of time with him watching a core set of those films, but my mother had a love of films that I think probably were a greater emphasis on storytelling than maybe the way a genre like the Westerns, or there's obviously some great Westerns and great stories in those Westerns, but I think overall you might say that the kinds of films that she watched, a huge range from great kind of lurid neo-noir, and not even neo-noir really, like Leave Her to Heaven, to romantic pictures, comedic pictures. She definitely pushed me in that direction toward theater, as I've ended up being so much a part of my life. Was not something that was part of my family's life in really any big way, because we didn't have access to it where I grew up. I was born in Detroit, but then we moved to Washington State, and so there wasn't really a lot of theater. The live theater that I did participate in or get a chance to see, I just really loved that live communal element of it. And so I was drawn to it. The more, as I got older, the more access I had to it. But television, books, that really got me started on wanting to do some of that storytelling myself.
Awesome.
Neil, what's it?
Sorry, we have no time left, but you got that answer.
All right, thanks for your time. I'm curious what your favorite part of writing is, because, like, for me as a graphic novel writer and coming up sort of as a screenwriter before I started writing graphic novels, and I'm not close to being on the level you've been on for your career. But as far as, like, it goes for me, it's like that draft. I love working on the drafts after the vomit draft. Like, once you get through that vomit draft of, like, oh my God, to me, that's like the real tough part. And then being
I may have been isolated for a while because I've never heard vomit drafts before, so I'm going to credit it to you. It's a good one.
No credit to me, because I've heard that from other writers. But yeah, the vomit, I'll
steal it from you and credit it.
You can steal it from me. You can credit me if you like. But
yeah, I know what you mean. I like that draft as well, I guess. So what does that say about me? I like vomit, I guess.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
I'm not going to examine that too closely. But I like, I seem to like all aspects of it. I certainly like, and I guess whatever you're talking about after that first draft, vomit or otherwise,
right?
It's rewriting. I love rewriting and continuing to carve away at this thing. It's a little like sculpting. You see this thing underneath it that you keep chipping away at. And sometimes it's the reverse. I guess you're adding material back or going in a different direction. I've met a lot of people who really just despise the idea of rewriting. They think magically it comes out perfectly the first time and don't want to
Really?
touch it.
I need to meet these people.
God bless them. Yeah, I'm not one of them. So but I like that part of the craft, of getting in there and getting your hands dirty and
Yeah.
keep working on it. I mean, I've gone back to plays. I mean, it's different with films, of course. If you get lucky enough to actually put it on film or tape or whatever it is, is tape done? I don't know. Whatever it is, at that point it becomes kind of locked in, and someone might remake it years later, but it is then its own thing. But certainly on stage, I've gone back now in a career that has lasted long enough to say that I've gone back several times to various things. I try and treat it like something new, and so I've gone back to things that have been published and continued working on them. So
Sure.
I do like rolling up my sleeves and getting my hands dirty and doing the work. So I definitely like that part. I guess I like the kind of isolation of writing, the fruition of it, of seeing, something a blank page that becomes filled with something, and you can arrange those words any way you want, and I guess it's like a huge Scrabble game. Eventually, you keep throwing stuff up there, and eventually there's words, and they start to mean something, and so there's a pleasure to that. And I've in these last 7 months that we've been in some kind of isolation or locked down a little bit, and all those things that have come with this crazy wave of disease. I've certainly got a taste of that again, of going back to my roots. I think I'm sure we're going to get a huge surplus of material that people have written. Some people have felt like, gosh, I can't write during this time. But it's not that I've rediscovered it, but I've certainly refelt that just pure pleasure of, I'm writing this. I don't know what audience it's for. Will it ever see an audience? Will it, come to the stage? Will it go to being made into a film? That's secondary to the fact that, boy, I just enjoyed sitting there and working on it. So that's some small light in my personal darkness of, this has been, an ordeal, and it's been an ordeal for everybody. But there is that pleasure that it's not, I wasn't writing this for a commission. I didn't get paid for that. There have been those things in this time that I've written that are strictly just for my own pleasure of writing.
It's very interesting because I have writer friends, TV writer friends who pitch all the time, and they'll say, like, they'll ask me to write comic books because they'll say, I work so much on writing developing a TV series or developing something, and the story I've been working on, and it doesn't sell, or it sells and it doesn't get made. And it's so frustrating. And they're like, I'd rather just, like, at least with a comic book, like, I know I can get it published. Like, if you publish it, then it's out there, even if it's not, millions of eyes watching it. It's just an interesting thing to be able to write and with the payoff of actually having something come out, be published or be produced is.
That's a really difficult thing, I think, for a lot of people. We get the same taste of what it is for, like, actors who, constantly go audition, and how rarely they actually get those few minutes in front of the camera. I think that's why a lot of people go and they become a writer or a director or a producer, so they can, actually just be working more often than those few minutes they get in front of a camera. And that's why I think they go back to the stage. A lot of people think, they just want to get applause and all that shit. Well, they might. Who doesn't?
Right.
Who doesn't want to
be recognized for their work?
It's not such a terrible thing. It doesn't happen, very often to the butcher and the baker, and I guess the candlestick maker either. He might get more applause because candles are cool and they're more difficult to make, probably. But I think that idea of just, I'm going to go there and I know for several hours I'm going to be doing my craft. Whereas, if I'm not telling you anything, being in front of a camera for those couple of moments and the pressure of just, turn it on. You're an actor. You could just have this magical ability to do this thing. We'll light the scene for 4 hours, but now immediately do your job and make it amazing. That's a lot of pressure for somebody, and they, out of a day, they might get a few minutes in front of the camera. So I think, that thing that like being a writer, which you're talking about, who like we spend all this time behind the scenes, and then you go pitch the thing around town and it doesn't get sold, and that was it. That's a hard gig when there's some element to what you do that it takes one more step before it is on the screen, or big or small. As opposed to a novelist, it's like, sell it or not sell it, you can sit and read it, in the same way. I guess you can do that with a screenplay or a teleplay, but there is that other step to the process that is not the same as I go make a painting and here it is.
Right.
It may hang in a museum, it may hang in your house, it may not hang anywhere, but it is finished. It doesn't need another step.
Sure.
That's a tough part of a lot of the mediums out there in the arts.
Yeah, definitely is. And to further that, I have a question about just your ear for dialogue, and like the difference between a playwright and since you do both, this is a question I think is perfect for you. With plays, I feel like it's important to have it's really even more so important to have structure within your written dialogue. Not to say it's not in films, and certainly I'm sure there's film directors and film writers that are very strict with like wanting their dialogue said exactly how it is. But do you find a balance? Like how do you find that balance between, say, TV or film and actors who might want to improv a scene in a feature or TV series versus your plays? Are you very strict about your dialogue, I guess is what I'm asking in a long-winded way?
I personally am not. I think I'm very collaborative in that way, but I'm firm about the idea that, hey, I took time to write this and I thought this through. It may not seem like it, on occasion you may look up and say, who the hell wrote this? But I meant to write it a certain way, and I thought it through and thought it through again and wrote it down and did all that stuff. So I'm not just like throwing out an idea that I put in parentheses, and if you don't like this, just make up your own shit as well. I believe that it's going to work, and I think the best thing is the rehearsal that tells you whether it works or not. You very quickly can kind of sense that this scene is working or not working, and I'm happy to work on that. If somebody has another idea, great. I'm very much a kind of may the best idea win person. I don't want to just throw it out and say, I just love to improv. That's great. Then, get in an improv troupe and go to town, have fun. But I'm certainly not against, a great line is a great line. And that may come from an actor, it may come from someone on the set. I'm open. But I do feel like, that was my job to bring the script, and I did it. I'm always, as I say, tinkering with it. But so I guess in that same sense, I'm ready and willing for other people to tinker, but I'd rather tinker with what we have and see if we can make that better. That's what you at one point agreed to come and be a part of. And so let's try and shape that to be the best it can be. If another idea comes out of that, then great. But I don't just assume that actors in a couple of minutes will necessarily write something better than what you spent hours working on. So it's somewhere in the middle, I guess. I'm definitely open, but it's not just like weirdly, for someone who has so many screenplays that have been lauded and Oscar nominations, I've repeatedly read like Woody Allen is fairly easy about dialogue that way. Like, if that doesn't work for you, then make it sound right in your mouth or whatever. And that's always been surprising to me. Happily so, but I would have thought, oh gosh, he's going to be so precise about what he's written down.
Yeah, he would seem like somebody would be.
There's every and ah, and all the actors who have tried to like emulate the way that he sort of was, in his
his
Well,
performance.
I guess when he was acting
Yeah.
more, when he was more of his own sort of protagonist, there were those films he did where there was somebody else who was kind of standing in for that character, and you would kind of get that sense of, boy, they're trying to emulate him, some more so than others, but so you'd think, oh gosh, he's very specific about every and ah and pause, and yet I've read, as I say, several times that that's not the case. So I'm a little surprised. But again, I've heard people in the thing. I guess the main difference on paper is that you if I were to purchase your screenplay, I then have that screenplay and I can get in there and mess around and change the title and rip scenes out, and it's all kind of been a economical transaction. Whereas in the theater, there's a I don't know if it's certainly not a written law, but it's kind of just everyone follows the notion that we can't change any dialogue without the playwright's consent.
Yeah.
And so it's a much that if you were to be that person who says, I don't want anything changed. And there have been those playwrights certainly that are living now, and others famously, who have passed away now, like someone like Edward Albee, I think was very much Samuel Beckett. Again, someone who was like, what's on the page is there. Do that play. And Albee I've seen interviews where he would say that, I'm sorry, I just know better. And so that was the way. If you wanted to do an Albee play, you did what he wrote, not like, oh, I think I'll do most of Virginia Woolf, and then I'll just make some shit up as well. That just probably doesn't really work for him, and he made it clear that was not going to be the case.
Right.
So some people, as I say, are very much like that, and I'm less so. But I do feel like respect the work. As a director, I try and do the same thing. I don't try and write it or direct it as I would have written it. I try and direct what's on the page, and so I go in with that intention, and then sometimes you find some other path that leads you to a new place.
Right. Early on, you did a play that you turned into a film called The Shape of Things. And at the film's premiere back in 2003, I was an editor at Movie Maker magazine, and I'll never forget the reactions of critics walking out of the theater in shock and dismay. It was chaos. And that's when I really became a fan of your work, because I've always believed the ultimate success of an artist is to get an audience to see things in a different way, to invoke a reaction of some kind, good or bad. And the fact that the film and experience have stayed with me for now 17 years is really a testament to your work. And my question is, as a writer, do you see yourself as a provocateur where you are consciously trying to provoke and solicit reactions, or is it more of a byproduct of the material you choose to explore?
It's probably a bit of both. I'm happy that The Shape of Things stuck with you in that way, and it's great to remember that. I was about to say, where were you this week? I had a little play open that the New York Times came to. It's like the first play that's been up for months now, and the reviewer from the Times came and said that oh God, I was just waiting for the twist. I knew there was going to be a twist. He just uses those too often. So I guess 17 years on now, I've got to stop using them because he was just despised the idea that I might have that. So I hope he doesn't read any O. Henry or anything like that. He'll be in for a shock. But it's I guess it's a little bit of both when you're working. I think rarely do I ever have just a drive to be provocative, because it's a tricky bar to set for yourself to like kind of keep topping that. Oh, well, what else is going to be dark and mysterious or take your breath away this time? I'll have to keep get into cannibalism next, or incest, or incestual cannibals, or something that just keeps making people gasp. And that's not, if you can make people gasp simply because the work has been good, I mean, that's certainly where I would love to sit in my career. So that's probably been more the push, and yet not being afraid to tackle subjects that might be uncomfortable or push you toward, that place, maybe has led to that happening, more often than not, or too many times, as others may say. But I do think somewhere in between, some world of, I'm not afraid of that, but it's not what I'm reaching for every time, because that would get old. So I do, as a director, certainly have gone from, original stuff, remakes, adapting books, play to film, as you mentioned. So I've tried to have a pretty wide breadth of things come out as a director, and then as a writer, I'm sure I've probably had a little more narrow focus on the kinds of things that I wanted to put out there, at least that were original. So I guess just trying to be a good storyteller and trying to keep an audience interested. That's really the mandate for me. I mean, that's really the pact that you're making with an audience is, hey, there's so many things you could choose. I'm going to promise you that if you come to see what I'm doing, I'm going to give you an interesting story. I'm going to take 2 hours of your time, but I'm going to hopefully make it worth it. I'm going to tell you a tale you have not heard before, even if that tale is generally one that you have heard before. Oh, here's a divorce story. Here's a story about someone dealing with cancer. Whatever it is, I'm going to give you a take on that hopefully is interesting and one that you haven't really overheard.
Love that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I to further about, further a little bit on sort of the subjects you've touched on in your writing, to compare it, a few years back, there's a Hollywood exec who actually later tried to option a different graphic novel of ours, but it was something I wrote that she had received, and she called the comic book series, like I think she said I was promoting violence against women, and some of the characters in the story were, was about a white supremacist group that was violent against women, and the characters in the graphic novel, of course, were acting the way a racist or a racist person would act. And it kind of bothered me at the time, because I'm like, well, you're kind of you're calling this work racist or misogynistic because the characters in it are being the character. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because it happens to have those characters.
Right. Because it happens, and I know this is something you've dealt with in your career. How angry or not angry? Maybe it doesn't bother you. How angry or not angry do you get when somebody kind of labels you that way because you happen to write a character who acts in that manner? I mean, for me, it bothered me.
Yeah, I guess I've gotten less and less so. So it probably did in the beginning. It just felt unfair. Like, this is your job and you've misread this. From sort of the first movie that I did that people took note of, In the Company of Men, and then on from there, this sort of misogynist label or misanthrope or that kind of thing. And I thought, that's not really a very, very good reading of that at all. But labels, they stick. And so that gets, tiresome and old and all those things, but you kind of just have to kind of keep chugging and outlive it. And either prove them wrong or prove them right, or, mix it up. It just sort of is what it is. And it's funny that people always, they not always is a bad thing to say, I guess, they often assume the worst about you, about the work, about, they look at The Walking Dead and they assume that the writer is, oh, well, if you have the capacity for thinking of Negan, then you must be that character.
Yeah.
Rather than, how come I'm not Carl? How come you didn't assume that
right.
Rather than the worst guy in the book, or the series of books.
Well, so, you need to have your antagonists at some point.
If you go write a book with nothing but protagonists, you'll find just how boring that book is. No conflict is really not that exciting to read, write, watch, whatever. So yeah, but they as soon as you write an antagonist that I guess stirs something in people, and that's a compliment of some kind, there's that assumption that because you were able to think of that. See, I guess it goes back to the old sort of like, was Shakespeare a murderer because he could think of Macbeth? Did he have to have,
Yeah.
at some point in his life, killed somebody to do that? I'm guessing no, but who knows?
Well, it also touches on to bring something that just came to mind with Quentin Tarantino and his use of the N-word, and
Right.
it's very polarizing.
Characters. Why am I going to just assume that he was Charles Manson in his last film, or was he the young girl at the ranch, or was he, in the end, was he any of them? Probably not. He just was, him, because he's such an outsized personality. You sort of know which one was him. It seems like such a cut rate, simple take on things, and yet it happens often. So yeah, I can understand your frustration, and it sometimes still happens. Sometimes I call out critics for not for disliking something, but being lazy or just bad at what they do. Like for some reason they assume that their statement is the end of it, and if so much good and bad has come from the internet, but we've seen now with comment pages and all those kinds of things that the conversation can continue. And boy, have I found some people, there's a group of people who really don't like to be criticized, and that would be critics. They hate it.
Yeah,
it's a funny thing. It's that they hate to get what they do all the time. But it's only when somebody like really says something that is offensive to you as a person, not about the work. Like I remember years ago when the Village Voice was still an actual paper. Somebody reviewed a short play of mine that was based on Medea, and if you know how that story is, it doesn't end well. For a lot of people, really, but it's basically about a woman who kills her children to get back at her husband, and I did a modern take on it. And the reviewer, who obviously didn't care for me or my work, and this piece as well, basically kind of snarkily at the end of their review said, "Oh, if only LaBute's mother had done the same."
Oh, Jesus!
And so. I'm good with the rest of the review up to that point.
Yeah,
and then I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to write back to that guy. And so wrote back and said, basically don't ever talk about my mother, and I'm happy to meet you anytime and talk about this.
Right.
You pick the playground and I'll show up.
Right.
It was basically calling out and never heard a word back.
Of course not.
But I'm sure they were wildly offended and pointed fingers and got all their little critic friends around and oohed and awed. But that's just really garbage to do.
Well, it's so hypocritical.
It's talking about somebody's mom, basically.
Right. On top of the fact that they're accusing you.
You very well wanted my mom to have killed me in the womb, but you know what? She didn't, and I'm here, and so deal with me. And like the work, don't like the work, or whatever, but don't talk about her.
Right.
So that kind of thing is ridiculous and well worth pointing out. But everything else is sort of like I get to do my I have my say, you have your say, and on we go. And that's the way it goes. Sure, would you like people to love stuff all the time? I guess, yeah, sure. But in the end, you kind of ultimately, I think the best advice I ever got was you can't believe anybody. Don't believe the good ones, because if you believe the good ones, you have to believe the bad ones. It's not just like, oh, the ones who like it get it. Sometimes people don't like it. They get it and they don't like it, and that's the way it goes.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So that's, I guess that's, it's a funny business, critics. The idea for me is I really don't need anybody telling me whether I like something or should go watch something. They can highlight the fact that I might not have heard about that, but in the end, rare is the opinion that I go, oh, I'm gonna just listen to them, and I guess I won't take a look at it. If that material looks interesting enough to me, I'm probably going to check it out or read it or listen to it, whether that critic liked it or not.
Yeah, that's the way to go.
I guess the playing field has been leveled so much, as I say now, with the internet, that there's just so many voices out there that there aren't like those definitive Pauline Kaels and people like that who can steer how a country looks at movies or books or albums or those kinds of things.
Sure.
Yeah, it's everybody's got an opinion now. Everybody's a writer.
Well, I guess they always had them. I had just no idea how narcissistic the world was until the internet.
Right, until Twitter.
Yeah,
I remember I was old enough to remember that when people had, my diary that was hidden in their bedroom and it had a lock on it. It was like, no, I mean, a lock that you could snap off with your fingers, but it was a little lock, and a little key that held your secret thoughts. And now, today it's like, I can't get my secret thoughts on the internet fast enough. Let me tell you about that other secret that I have.
Right.
I just had no idea that people needed so much love. I just, talking about clapping, we really should have clapped for everybody a lot sooner. And maybe it would have quelled some of this absolute unbelievable narcissism that people have. Like, you must want to know more about what I did today. I'm like, geez, I don't even care what I did today, let alone what you did today. Oh, wow, you found another, vase. That's amazing. I can't wait to send me another picture. One just as I really need another picture of that vase. It's just crazy, the idea that our world has come to a place where there are people who are, a profession is called an influencer.
Yeah.
Really spend time influencing what you might think.
Now, yeah, I kind of want to shift gears a little bit. less on criticism and talk
like radio here. We're starting to sound like we're getting on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yeah, we're doing the Joe Rogan.
Not the Joe Rogan podcast.
Mark's like, this inaugural podcast went off the rails, Ralph. What did you do to me?
So I want to come back to Van Helsing because fantasy horror seems like a departure from a lot of your previous works as a playwright and a director. And I was curious what attracted you to Van Helsing and how the project came to light.
Well, a couple of my earlier things, like In the Company of Men, got called horror films, back in the day. So I guess there's always been some kind of interest in psychological terror and horror and the way that people, power games that people, certainly, I mean, what is Friday the 13th, if not, a power game where, there's a guy with a mask and a machete, but it's still power, I guess. So I've always, my mom loved a good scary movie, and I accompanied her to a lot of those things. But I've always loved classic stuff like that, and Dracula was right there at the top of the list. I did an adaptation of Dracula for the stage years ago, and interestingly, the Van Helsing I wrote in that adaptation was a female, and a very androgynous Dracula, that's something else that we've now, as you may have seen in the 4th season of Van Helsing, we tapped into as well. We have a woman playing Dracula, and it's been a real treat to see that. That was, I felt like, honestly, something that we hadn't seen before. So that was a lot of fun. I worked with some producers from Canada who were producing the series Hell on Wheels, and
is it Chad and Chad Oakes, right?
Yeah, Chad Oakes and Mike. We got friendly working on that series, and there was some point out there in the middle of the prairie in Calgary that they were like, hey, have you ever thought about how do you feel about vampires and that sort of thing? And they let me know that this material had come into their hands, that there was an interest in, not really at the time taking the Van Helsing, the idea certainly was, here you've got a female Van Helsing through your world, your comic world. But we obviously, if you know that world, we haven't followed that very closely. It was
Sure.
the idea was let's take a female Van Helsing, and then they had this the other really good idea I thought they had was the notion that she could turn vampires back into human beings.
They bite her. Right.
Yeah, I thought that was she could bite someone, or if they bite her, right, they could be brought back to being human. So that notion I thought was again something I hadn't seen, was clever, and so with my predisposition for that world, I thought, yeah, that's something that would be interesting to get into and work with. Definitely a genre that I'm not known for, and just again pushing the boundaries of what you're doing every day as a writer or a director or a producer. And so I said, yeah, let's do that. I'll jump in and work on this with you. And so we recruited a bunch of really good writers out of Canada. Somebody who'd worked, had done a lot of creating, Simon Barry, who's just done Warrior Nun. He was there at the inception of this. And so, we just kind of all created this world that felt interesting to us. And here we are 5 years later, still chugging away. I mean, this will be the final season. Everything will kind of come to at least a kind of ending. The beauty of knowing when you're doing your last season is you don't have to have that sort of cliffhanger that says we could go on, but this could also be an ending. You're able to say, yes, this is how we see this chapter at least coming to a close. So that's kind of how I got involved.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do remember when we first pitched this to Syfy, that in the room they were literally like, "Oh, we love a female Van Helsing idea," and then it was like, "Could you make this post-apocalyptic? And can we do And I remember in that I think it was one of the very first discussions we had was the reverse, reversing the vampire. If they bite. Yeah. If she bites her, they'll turn back from vampire to human. And that was like something that was very important to them. And I remember thinking, they right away, it was sort of like, oh, this isn't going to be anything like our comic. but at the same time, we were like, you know what, like, and when we found out you were involved, and it kind of took that weight off our shoulders of going like, oh, okay, we was that reaction of like, oh, we have somebody like we know can do this, and it was like kind of like, okay,
well, thanks for that.
Not as scary.
I think in some ways that's very freeing, both on our on all sides, that the material that people love that you guys have done remains its own thing, and you've inspired this thing, and it's its own thing, and so you can kind of enjoy them both and not be just looking at it going, oh, they didn't do that. Oh, they didn't quite get the goggle lenses exactly right on her hat. And, those things, you could spend more time just going, hey, this idea, really has some elasticity to it. We can create our world. They can create their world. I remember everybody today has a lookbook and all kinds of like a slide presentation for shit when they come, to sell something to television or film. I remember they put a few images together for this when they showed it to me, and they had this woman, with her back to us, walking in the wasteland with a sword in her hand and ripped clothing and fire in the distance. And their tagline was, "Resurrection is a bitch." And right. I was like, no, I like that. We should definitely use that. I don't know if they ever have used that for the show itself, but I was always like, well, top that one, guys, because that's a great one.
I remember that as a teaser. I think it was Dan, if I'm not mistaken, Dan March. I don't know how well you know him, but I remember that came up in an early meeting. The resurrection is a bitch.
And we really embraced that. We were like, she really should be. She's been asleep. She's not happy. She doesn't know what the hell's going on. And we tried to make Vanessa not unlikable, but very, how you would feel waking up and life has changed and your daughter's missing and, you're cranky. She was, she doesn't really, she wasn't like the easiest person to embrace as a protagonist. But I love that about her. And then the life that Kelly Overton breathed into that character, you can't, the value of actors, you can't give too much credit to them.
Right.
Not only the way they have to work, as I mentioned earlier, but just, that taking off what's on the page and making it human. They just become that face of that. And having people like Jonathan Scarf and Chris Heyerdahl, people breathe life into these characters and make them so terrific and fun to watch. And I mean, this character of Sam, wherever he came from, the idea of us, we're locked in a hospital trying to keep the vampires out, and we've got a serial killer in here with us. That was a great little spark. I don't remember who came up with that. I'll take credit because nobody else is here. But that, the notion like that, and where Chris Heyerdahl went with that character who seemed like this, deaf guy, seemed like the nicest guy in the world. And then slowly, the journey that character took was a blast to watch. And mostly it was just being around set going, what is Chris going to do today? What, wild place will he drag this character to? It's a blast to see people do that.
That's a good segue, because I wanted to touch on acting for a second. Because I'm an actor. I've been in SAG for 20 years. It's kind of crazy that 20 years ago it was cheap to get in. Auditioning used to drive me insane with anxiety, because it was always that moment of like, it felt like you were kind of just put on the spot right away. You didn't have time to really delve in or develop a full-fledged, fleshed out character. So it was always something that was really a big part of my anxiety as an actor. And some of my actor friends called it unbearable. Now you can put yourself on tape, so it's a little bit easier. But can in-person auditions can auditions, I guess in general, be deceiving? Have you ever, and I'm not going to ask you to name any names, of course, have you ever regretted a casting choice? Because I feel like with auditioning, it is a much different process than an actual, when you get on set, you have the time to develop a character as an actor.
Oh yeah, sure. That's I feel like I'm very forgiving and very much in the same, like have the sort of pregnancy pains that an actor does when they're in the room. I try and make it as nice as it can be, because it can be horrible. And you can get in a situation where someone's just looking at their phone and they just kind of feel like, oh, we had to see this person. And you can feel all those things. And it's like they prepared, give them the 5 minutes that they've been, scheduled for. And you never know. You just never know who's going to I've certainly been surprised in a good way. I mean, yeah, of course, sometimes you cast someone and they don't work out as well as you thought they might. Absolutely. But for the most part, I've been really happy with the kind of cast that I've put together over the years. And I think I've been good with actors. Actors know I respect them and like what they do and admire what they do and know how hard it is and all that stuff. And yeah, you have a few seconds to tap dance your way in front of somebody and say, please pick me, and they know it's a buyer's market. They know there's 50 others waiting out there. So that's a really tough gig. And so I want to be as accommodating and nice about it. And, I only get to pick one of them. And that makes it really hard when you see 5 people, you go, I know any of those people or 10 of them that could do this part.
Right.
But I can only take one. And a lot of times it comes down to, just the overall look of the cast. Oh, we've got, a blonde in there already. So instead of even thinking, wow, could she dye her hair? We go, oh, well, what about the redhead? Or what about her who's, all the choices you make are so rarely based on there's a level of talent that a lot of these people have gotten to and craft that they're all viable options. And so that, that just makes it really hard. That on both sides, it should be hard. People on both sides of the table should know that it's a hard choice, not just the person who has to walk in there and hope to get that job.
Yeah, I assume
I feel for them all the time. It's a tough thing.
I assume you have had those moments where you wanted to cast two people or three people, and really
absolutely, or want to cast somebody, want to cast somebody, and then they won't let you, because
right, sure.
somebody else has more Instagram followers. Again, to swerve back there, that's part of the maddening landscape of today. But yeah, somebody's star meter is higher, or this or that, or all these crazy things that isn't just based on who's the best person for this job. It makes it all tough. But you try and let people know that this is you're doing the best you can to get a cast who's going to bring this thing to life. So it is what it is. It's a very fallible process, but it's about, it's kind of like democracy. It's not perfect, but it's better than a lot of what's out there. So we live with it.
Yeah, I want to kind of circle back a little bit to Van Helsing for one last question, because after breathing life into the series and after 3 seasons, and you mentioned this earlier too, you stepped down as showrunner, Jonathan Walker took over, and I was curious, what made you step down? And also, since it is the final season, did you have an overall vision for how the show would end, and is it on par with how the show actually does end?
Jonathan was there from the beginning as a writer, and was someone that I kind of kept an eye on as some. I knew that Simon was not going to necessarily stay with the show throughout the whole run of it, because he had ambitions to create other things, and so Jonathan was someone who was just great with character and ideas. Just I had endless ideas. So he was someone I felt like could really take over the show, because he was also a local and I wasn't. I was living away from home 7 months out of the year for 3 years, and 8 months out of the year, whatever it was. So that just got to be wearying after a while. And then going into the 4th year, it was like I really think I should stay home, work as an EP, write for the series, but let somebody else, be there and on the ground. And it made sense to hand the reins over to somebody else who was still living in Vancouver and could do the work. And it was, I think, a really smooth transition for the most part. Every person is going to have a different set of eyes on it, but I think we'd established a lot by that point. So Jonathan was able to keep a lot of what we had done going in the same direction, and then branch out in ways that he saw fit as well. In terms of, will it end the way, it probably won't end the way exactly that I would have necessarily ended it, but that's absolutely par for the course. Jonathan is seeing it through to the end, and so there are variations there. But I think in general, this is going to be how we would have, if we were told from the very beginning, we've got 5 years, what's your 5-year plan? This would have probably paced out very similarly. I probably would have leaned a little less on supernatural elements, and that there was, I think, much more of that this past season than in previous seasons. But it's Dracula, and so that there's no harm in going to that place. So that's really how it kind of came about. And even this season, I've written, I think just 1 episode, and was an executive producer on it again. So I've kept my hand there, and always was a part of casting and where the story was going to go. But it just became something that I couldn't be in person for throughout all of those 5 years.
Well, and especially this last season, which I heard that Van Helsing was one of, if not the first series to actually be able to go back to filming during the pandemic.
Yeah. In fact, I heard that it was like in North America, the
Yeah.
first, if not one of the first.
Yeah,
The
well,
first.
I think it was.
They had shot 3 episodes in Bratislava over in Europe, and then came back and started in on the Vancouver leg, and that got shut down. And then 3 months later, maybe 3 or 3.5, something like that, they were back up and running and had 170 some cast and crew that had to be tested and maintained, and managed to get to the finish line without losing a person. So it was an admirable job of just putting their, that again was Chad and Mike working their way and figuring out how to get it all done, and they did. So I can't give them enough credit for just kind of shouldering it and pulling it across that finish line.
I have a question that's probably one you've answered a million times. So, but I think it's important for anybody listening, especially to, this podcast, because there's probably some creators out there. What advice, what's a good piece of advice, just like one of your best pieces of advice to give to an aspiring storyteller?
I guess I would say, if you want to be a writer, write. If you're gonna be a storyteller, tell stories. So many people talk about it, and go to Starbucks and look like they're writing, but fewer actually sit down and put in the time it takes to just put page on page on page until they have something that this vomit draft you talk about. Vomit.
I want that credit.
You're getting it right here. I'm handing it right back to you. I'm virtually taking your vomit and handing it back to you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. That's it's really just that labor. There's a reason that like Playwrights is written like the same way as like a wheelwright is, that there's work to it. You go and you roll up your sleeves and do the work. As far as getting those stories out there, I guess, one of the best things I could say is just, don't take no for an answer. If somebody, closes the door and says no to you, there are other doors. You keep pounding on doors. You keep putting it out there until you don't. The good news and bad news is you only need one person, one company, one, studio to believe in what you're doing and embrace it and put it up on our screens. And so you just kind of have to believe in yourself and keep pushing, and I guess something I've told a lot of writers along the way, or actors, is get the idea of if out of your head in terms of a career. If this works out, if I get this, but think about it and replace that word with when. That it will, believe that it will happen, and not that just this good energy will make this happen, but I think if you open that door, that possibility that it won't happen, it just sits there and stares at you and can mess with you in a way that is not healthy. It's a long road for just about everybody. Every overnight success has worked really hard to get where they are, and I don't believe them if they don't tell you they've been lucky, because it is a lot of times just luck on top of hard work and being ready when the opportunity arises and all those things. But for me, it really was not letting if be part of the vocabulary. It really was about, I know this is going to happen. I know when the time comes, I'm going to be ready because I've got a script that I believe in, and I'm ready to pounce and do those things. And that's, I do think really kind of what happened. So that's, I guess it's sort of comes down to, stay positive, which is really tough in a very, what was already a very, isolative business. Now in this world, it becomes even more so sometimes. Mm-hmm. So I think that's, some of the best advice I can give.
Great, helpful advice, actually. So before we let you go, we have a quick, it's rapid fire.
Okay.
We've done it with other guests on our virtual streams. Since this is our first podcast, we're doing it just on the podcast, not on the live video. But here we go. 5 seconds, you have to answer. In the spirit of Halloween, what is an irrational fear of yours?
Drowning.
Okay.
I mean, it's not really irrational because
that's
pretty really happen.
Especially if you
can't. This drowning in water that's on fire with sharks below.
That just adds a little bit.
Which actually segues to another. This is extremely irrational, but and I'll say thank you, Steven Spielberg, for ruining my aquatic life. After Jaws.
And mine. Yeah.
Sharks in swimming pools. That actually feeling like I'm in a pool and there could be a shark in here.
Weird.
Creating that much anxiety from that film.
As a child or now? Because
just started recently. Yeah, this month. No, really. When the movie came out. Yeah.
Okay. Just making sure.
It's been many years.
Because you're going for a swim and you're just looking over your shoulder every now and then.
I just suddenly thought, there were sharks in the pool. No.
You never know. Favorite horror film of all time?
Oh, shit. I don't know. I'll certainly say there's The Exorcist made as big an impact on me as anything.
Of course. Very excellent choice. Weirdest job you've ever had?
Weirdest job I've ever had. Well, God, I grew up on a farm, so shoveling, cow shit is not that weird, but it's tough. Weirdest job
could be weird. I mean, it's not.
Yeah, unloading boxcars. Does anybody do that anymore? I don't know. I've done that. I worked at UPS for one day. For one day. It was so hard.
I did the same thing. I swear to God. One day at UPS.
One day, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe
I swear to God.
They only have people come in for one day, so there's no health insurance or whatever. I mean, it was so like just these. You opened up these semi-trailers with boxes that spilled out, and they wanted you to work so fast.
Yeah.
And I grew up, as I say, on a farm. I worked. I know what
worked your ass off.
I worked that one day, went to my car, and I threw up in the car on the way home. I was so glad that makes you laugh. That's great.
No, it doesn't, because it says reminds me. It triggered my memory.
I called in, not just like sick, but I quit like the next day. So that's probably right up there in terms of like worst or strangest jobs I ever had for the shortest amount of time.
It's just funny that I lasted one day and I forgot until you said it that happened to me. I didn't throw up though.
You got PTSD. I threw up, but you actually blanked it out.
Right, I blanked it out. Best compliment you ever received? Do you remember it? I stole that question from Larry King.
You throw like a girl? No, that's probably not even a compliment, actually. I just took it as such. I was so hungry for compliments.
Yeah. Depends on how good the girls are.
As a writer, probably you write women well. I don't always hear that, but I've heard it enough times that it. I go great, which translates into writing anybody who's outside of who you are.
Sure.
Is a compliment, because it's hard enough to write. Even to write yourself. So to write somebody else that especially someone of the opposite sex saying that, I found to be a high compliment.
Sure. Last one. You're on death row. Okay. We don't know what you did, but you clearly killed somebody.
I did.
What is your last meal request, Neil?
Well, I think my son would really feel lousy if I didn't order the McRib, which you let me know today is coming back in December. So that tells you a little bit about how our minds work in terms of food. and the kind of palate that we're dealing with here.
McRib.
Gosh, it would probably involve hot dogs of some kind because I love hot dogs. I would probably have a pizza in there. I mean, I would go out big. You know, I mean, this is it. This is death row.
Right. You have to go big. I mean, you could do a McRib and a pizza together if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I would probably there would be some Doritos, but I put an asterisk there with it would be there's the old school Dorito, which you can still occasionally find the taco flavor, not these newfangled packages with, you know, neon colors and bullshit on them and different, you know, ghost peppers and stuff like that. These were just there was the original yellow bag of Doritos, and then there was the taco flavored bag, and that was probably my all-time favorite, you know, chip. So those would be there. Probably a Diet Pepsi, maybe a Coke. Diet Pepsi, I'm not sure.
I mean, you could go full sugar at this point.
Yeah, I might throw in a Slurpee, just, you know, because why shouldn't I have the taste of a Slurpee in my mouth when I'm executed? You know, Arby's, you know, I would probably just keep ordering shit, you know, all night long until 6. And really kind of freak them out that I could eat that much and they're just going to think, oh my God, it's going to be a horrible mess when we actually kill him.
Yeah.
or maybe he died of a food coma.
Yeah, you could.
I mean, you know you're going to go. Why not just kill yourself that way?
Have a heart attack while you're at it.
Yeah.
This is by far the best answer to this question.
Yeah, thank you. So,
I mean,
that would probably do it. That meal would probably sate me until I was executed.
Oh my God.
Awesome. Well, we before we let you go, we do want to let you kind of chime in and let us know what projects you're currently working on or have wrapped up that you'd like to promote or share.
I mean, gosh, there's so many things were on hold after, you know, the COVID crisis began that there's a film I'm hopefully going to be making sooner rather than later. Theater that I'm hoping to make. You know, there's not anything that's sitting there waiting to be seen yet. But I've churned out a fair amount of material in the last 7 months, and so it's been a creative period. And so I hope some of that reaches somebody's hands or eyes or, you know, whatever very soon. But time will only tell. It's a very strange time universally for, you know, amazingly for everyone. Everybody everywhere knows what we're each dealing with in sort of a first time strange way. So it's a unique period to be alive in, and yet I'm still, you know, watching stuff and reading and creating myself. So I'm trying to maintain some kind of normalcy in the middle of chaos, I guess.
That's awesome.
That's great.
We all are, I guess. It's been great to have you, Neil. We appreciate your time. I'd love to have you back sometime.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, guys.
If you're ever down to be back on, we'll definitely love to have you back.
Anytime. And maybe after season 5, we can gap and see how we feel about how the show went out.
That'd be fun.